Clara stepped out of the taxi and into the shadow of the towering iron gates, her fingers tightening around the worn leather strap of her bag as they creaked open to reveal the largest house she had ever seen. The mansion rose from the manicured grounds like a silent sentinel, its slate roof and towering windows reflecting the gray of the overcast sky. She had been warned by the agency, more than once, that this was no ordinary nanny position. "No one lasts more than a week," the woman on the phone had said, her tone caught somewhere between sympathy and disbelief. But the pay was more than Clara could earn in a year, and after months of patchwork jobs and unpaid bills, she couldn't afford to be picky. As she climbed the marble steps, the front door opened and there stood Alexander Hawthorne himself, the billionaire whose name appeared in glossy magazines and business headlines. He was taller than she expected, his presence commanding yet strangely weary, as though years of quiet battles had etched themselves into the lines of his face. "If you can last the month," he said without preamble, his voice low but deliberate, "the job is yours for life." He stepped aside, and Clara entered a world of polished floors, echoing halls, and an unsettling stillness that seemed to swallow her footsteps. It was there, by the grand staircase, that she saw the children, 7-year-old twin girls, standing side by side in matching pale dresses. One clutched a tattered cloth doll, its button eyes dull and mismatched, while the other peered at Clara from behind the carved banister, her expression unreadable. Their eyes, wide and dark, followed her every move with the stillness of portraits. Clara offered a warm smile, the kind she'd used countless times to ease shy children, but neither girl spoke or even blinked in response. "They'll warm up to you," Alexander murmured, though the tightness in his jaw suggested otherwise. As she was led through the house, from the gleaming kitchen to the expansive playroom, Clara couldn't shake the sensation that the walls themselves were listening. By the time she was shown her quarters on the second floor, the sun had dipped low, casting long shadows across the hallway, and the silence of the house pressed in from all sides. Somewhere deep inside, Clara felt the first ripple of unease, but she told herself it was only nerves. After all, they were just children. Weren't they? The first full day in the Hawthorne mansion began quietly, almost deceptively so, with the twins seated at the breakfast table, their small hands folded neatly in front of them as plates of untouched pancakes cooled before them. Clara tried everything, light conversation, playful questions, even a silly face or two, but the girls only stared, as if weighing her worth with every second of silence. After breakfast, she coaxed them into the playroom, a sunlit space filled with toys that looked pristine, as though they had never been touched. She suggested a board game, then a puzzle, and finally offered to read them a story, but each attempt was met with that same eerie stillness. By mid-afternoon, Clara began to notice small oddities. Her phone, which she'd left on the kitchen counter, was later found inside the freezer. Her shoes, neatly placed by her door, had been moved outside into the garden, and a long, precise line of marbles now stretched across the hallway in front of her bedroom. When she mentioned it to Alexander over dinner, he gave her a look that was more resigned than surprised. "They test everyone," he said, his fork pausing midway to his mouth. "They've been through 12 nannies in the past year." Clara wanted to believe it was simply mischief, the kind that troubled children used to cope with change, but that night, while she lay in bed, she heard faint giggles in the hallway, light, breathless, and distinctly childlike. She rose quietly, easing her door open, yet found the corridor empty, the laughter gone. When she checked the twins' room, they were in bed, eyes closed, breathing slow and even. Relief started to seep in until she noticed the older twin, Sophie, clutching her tattered doll tightly, her lips moving in a near whisper. Clara leaned closer and froze as she caught the words, "We can't let her go like the others, or he'll be mad." The hair on Clara's arms prickled. She withdrew silently, her mind racing with questions she couldn't yet form aloud. Who was he? And why did the warning feel less like a game and more like a truth the girls were too frightened to speak in daylight? That night, she locked her bedroom door for the first time. On her fourth night in the Hawthorne mansion, a storm rolled in, drumming against the tall windows and casting jagged streaks of lightning through the halls. Clara had just drifted into a light sleep when a faint knock woke her, followed by the sound of small feet shuffling on the carpet. She opened her eyes to find both twins standing silently at the foot of her bed, pale and wide-eyed. "It's starting again," Sophie whispered, her voice trembling. Without waiting for permission, the girls took her hands and led her down the hall toward the east wing, a section Alexander had explicitly told her was off-limits. The moment they crossed the threshold, Clara noticed the air felt heavier, colder, and smelled faintly of smoke, as though a fire had burned there long ago. The wallpaper was peeling, revealing dark stains beneath, and the light bulbs overhead flickered weakly. At the very end of the corridor stood a small, dust-coated door. Lily reached into the pocket of her nightgown and pressed a brass key into Clara's palm without a word. Inside the room, a single trunk sat against the far wall. Clara knelt, heart pounding, and opened it to find a pile of old photographs, each showing the twins with a different nanny, all smiling, all seemingly happy, until she noticed every face had been defaced with a black X across it. Beneath the photos were crumpled letters, their ink smudged but legible enough to read the desperate pleas: "Please believe me, something is wrong here. I can't stay another night." Clara's hands trembled as she reached the bottom of the trunk and found a cracked porcelain doll that looked disturbingly like the one Sophie carried. Just then, Lily's small voice broke the silence: "He doesn't like new people." Clara turned sharply, scanning the dim corners of the room, and for a fleeting second, she thought she saw movement, a shadow pulling back as though retreating deeper into the dark. The chandelier above them swayed despite the stillness of the air, and a cold draft whispered past her ear like a breath. Her instincts screamed to get the girls out, but their grip on her hands tightened, as though they feared leaving the room even more than staying inside. Clara didn't sleep the rest of that night, her mind replaying the images from the trunk and the shadow she could not explain. By morning, she had made a decision: she wasn't going to be the 13th nanny who disappeared without answers. That evening, after Alexander retired to his study, she gathered the twins in her room, locking the door and pushing a chair against it for good measure. The girls sat close together on the bed, clutching their dolls as the air in the room seemed to grow heavier by the minute. Without warning, 3 deliberate knocks sounded against the wood, slow, spaced, and far too forceful to be a child's. Clara's pulse thundered in her ears. "Who's there?" she demanded, though her voice shook despite her best efforts. A low, chilling voice seeped through the door, deep and calm, like someone reciting a fact rather than delivering a threat: "She doesn't belong here." Lily whimpered and buried her face in Sophie's shoulder. Clara felt something primal rise in her chest, a surge of protectiveness that overpowered the fear clawing at her spine. "Then neither do they," she shouted back, gripping a heavy lamp as though she could fight whatever was on the other side. The knocking stopped, but the silence that followed was worse, thick, charged, expectant. A sudden gust rattled the windows, the temperature in the room dropping so sharply that Clara's breath came out in pale clouds. Then, just as quickly as it had come, the pressure lifted. The air felt normal again. When morning came, golden light spilling through the curtains, the mansion felt subtly different, warmer somehow, less suffocating. Alexander appeared at her door, looking more unsettled than she had ever seen him. "The girls, they told me what happened," he said quietly, his usual composure cracked. For the first time, he admitted he had ignored the strange occurrences for years, convincing himself that money, repairs, and constant staff changes could fix whatever haunted the house. "But you didn't leave," he added, almost in disbelief. Clara looked over at the twins, now playing softly on the rug, their laughter light and unburdened. She had faced the job no one survived, and while she couldn't explain exactly what had happened, she knew one thing: the girls weren't afraid anymore. And that was enough for her to stay.